Millions of people are facing a humanitarian disaster as the armed conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, becomes a full-blown catastrophe. The United Nations, in a briefing, said more than 100,000 people have fled Sudan since heavy fighting broke out between rival forces on April the 15th. A further 334,000 people have been displaced within Sudan. The country's health ministry has also said about 500 people have been killed and more than 4,000 have been wounded in the fighting. Well, to speak on the ongoing fighting in Sudan, Majdullin El-Haj El-Tahir, expert on Sudanese geopolitics and advocate for democracy and human rights, joins me now. Many thanks for joining me. Now, it's been 2 weeks of continuous fighting in Sudan. Even with the ceasefire negotiations, foreign countries have begun evacuating their citizens. Now, what do you make of this whole situation?
Good evening. This whole situation is a very tragic one. The fighting in Khartoum is very heavy. The two parties have declared several times that there is a period of a number of hours of ceasefire, to which they both of them systematically violate their very own agreement. And what they do is that they use this kind of declarations of ceasefire as a means of military tactic in order to regroup and attack each other and so on. In the meantime, Khartoum, which is normally a town, a city with between 8 to 10 million people, there are millions of people trapped in who cannot leave their houses at all. They cannot leave the inside of their houses. They can't go outside in the yard of their houses. Hospitals are collapsing. There are very severe food shortages and water shortages. And the situation is very, very dire, and it doesn't seem it's gotten into the third week, and it doesn't seem to be relenting at all, either party, and they keep continuing fighting. We heard, in addition, that both parties have received, or at least one party, that is the Rapid Response Forces, have received munitions via Libya and some form of rearmament and refreshing their armies, and with absolutely no sign of the situation improving in any way or case. In the meantime, we have three main clusters of refugees, one at the border to South Sudan, one at the border of Egypt, and one at the Red Sea area by the town of Port Sudan, where people are trying to escape the conflict by going across the border. Now, the international community and humanitarian aid have been completely absent, and it is very chaotic. Now, in these three clusters, the situation is there is no fight. Very easily, there could be humanitarian aid coming
Consequences of this conflict if it is not stopped. Now, what are your biggest concerns, especially with the failure of the ceasefire agreements?
My biggest concern is that it will spill over in more than one way. First of all, Sudan is very important economically to a number of neighboring countries, including South Sudan. South Sudan receives a lot of daily goods from North Sudan, which means that the markets in South Sudan are going to be impoverished. There is a huge trade between Egypt and the Sudan, and Egyptian big trucks and vehicles carry all kinds of meat and vegetables and so on a daily basis to Egypt. There is also a very frequent food and meat to Saudi Arabia. These countries have lived on these three countries, neighboring countries, are very much dependent on commercial exchange with the Sudan. From a food security point of view, I think we will have a crisis in the region because of lack of food shortages from the Sudan. Remember, Sudan is a huge agricultural country, and in terms of livestock as well.
Well, even though you foresee a huge crisis in those regions, hopefully something happens, that a ceasefire would be ahead to once and for all, and the end of the war will be seen. Well, Majdalin El Tahir, many thanks, expert on Sudanese geopolitics and advocate for democracy and human rights. Thank you very much for your insight.